This is Criteria.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my co-host, James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hey, Thomas. How's it going?
Good. And we are here back for another discussion of the genre film noir. This will be our third such episode. We, what was the first one we discussed? We started with Out of the Past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has there been three?
Yes. We started with Out of the Past. We did Sweet Smell of Success.
That's right.
And now we're doing Sunset Boulevard.
That's pretty cool. That's three very different noir films.
Yes.
But two of them having to do with kind of the entertainment industry.
Yes. Yeah. So today we're talking about one of my favorite films, Sunset Boulevard, from 1950, directed by Billy Wilder and starring William Holden and Gloria Swanson and Eric von Stroheim.
A return to the Criteria podcast.
Yeah, because we saw Eric von Stroheim playing the German commander in Grand Illusion. Great role for him. So
we'll have to do an episode when we're done with the Vatican film list where we just sort of return to some of these films that we've talked about. Because Grand Illusion was a while ago.
Yeah,
and,
it really was.
You know, it'll be interesting to go back to that film in light of the performances here. You know?
Sure. So today we're not discussing the Vatican film list. We're going off list. We'll be back to the list soon.
And the reason for that is because there are no noir films on the film list, on the Vatican film list.
That's right. Yeah. So you mentioned two of these three films we've discussed have dealt with somewhat similar subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
So the previous one, Sweet Smell of Success, was about it was about the world of journalism.
Right.
And
but a very particular kind of journalism.
That's right. And this one is about Hollywood. And I would say the main characters are somewhat similar.
Yeah.
Not totally similar, but they're both kind of like beaten down. I mean, that's typical for a noir hero, I guess, but they're not beaten down in a cool way like some of the, the noir detectives are. These guys are sort of scrambling, ambitious, and sort of lowering themselves in the course of...
That was a point that you made in our first discussion of noir, was that the hero is kind of a loser,
right?
Right. And I think that these industries, these like really... I don't know what to call them, cutthroat or sort of hopeless industries, the rat race of entertainment industry, and then the rat race of sort of, what was he? He was like a leads guy. He fed leads to like this gossip journalist.
Right. He was a press agent. Yeah.
Press agent. Right. So those industries are kind of rife for this type of character.
I mean, you could have an interesting discussion about the loser as a modern phenomenon. Not that there weren't losers in the Middle Ages,
right?
And failed courtiers and stuff like that. But I do feel like when there's an expectation that everybody be getting ahead and improving their station in life instead of just sort of like being happy living in a certain,
that's right,
a certain status.
Yeah.
I think that creates like the character of the loser is probably much more predominant in the modern consciousness than it was in past eras. That would be my guess.
I once heard someone describe film noir as being about like the sort of like fever nightmare of the patriarchy as it's like, falling through the fingers like sand through the fingers of like these old white men, and that noir somehow like captures this. Obviously, I think that that's like a very reductive reading, but I think that there's something to it in that like there is a kind of I don't know, like this it's a feature of these noir films that things are slipping away, and evading. The Sweet Smell of Success, it's like success is just around the corner, but it's always not quite attainable.
Right.
And then here too, maybe we should give a quick synopsis of what the film is about. But with this main character, this screenwriter,
Joe Gillis.
Yeah, it's like this is a a very familiar kind of character to us nowadays, you know? So I don't know that it's the patriarchy, but it's definitely something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just interesting to think about, like, you know, if you're a farmer and your crops fail, like, that's not you're being a loser,
right?
You know?
Right.
I guess if you like don't work hard, then you're a loser, but that's like a different kind of thing. It's, you know, like I feel like in the past, losers probably mainly existed in the political sphere and places where it was like you had to butter people up and kind of like, you know,
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, of course you could lose if you're a merchant, you could do poorly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's elements of that, but just in anywhere where like sort of it has to do not with just like monetary ambition, but also like status ambition.
There just seems to be something of a modern anxiety that's captured in these films,
right?
You know, and I don't think just for white men,
right?
You know,
yeah. So, yeah. So this film is about Joe Gillis, played by William Holden, and Joe is a screenwriter. He's not an aspiring screenwriter per se. He's already made some movies. But he's a down-and-out screenwriter. He hasn't gotten anything made in a while. Inspiration, or what he thought of as inspiration, has not been striking. And he's basically given up on trying to make, you know, good stuff, and is just trying to make stuff that will sell, is where we meet him. Actually, where we meet him is he's already dead. At the beginning of the movie, I should say that. This movie begins with a narration by the main character about his own death. So it's already happened, which is also kind of interesting.
Yeah.
You know, narrative monologue is a frequent feature of noir films. But it's interesting to think about. Well, let's come back to that, like how that actually functions.
Yeah.
Like what that's doing. But, so Joe is a down and out screenwriter, and his car is about to be, he's basically buying it on installments, and he hasn't been paying his installments, and the guys come to repossess it, and he tries to hide it. He hides it in the garage of a, you know, what looks like a broken down old Hollywood mansion from the silent era days. And these are apparently things that would just sort of were part of the landscape and part of the experience of Hollywood. I mean, they still are. You still see mansions, but these sort of like old, you know, decadent mansions from the silent era were part of the consciousness of living in Hollywood, as Billy Wilder directed it, and that was part of what inspired this film. Now, so he goes there and he turns into a driveway, and then a voice calls him into the house. And to make a long story short, there's this old washed up silent film star named Norma Desmond, played by the great Gloria Swanson. And she ends up asking him to do some touch-up work on a script that she herself has written, which is going to be what he describes as a comeback and what she describes as a return, because she hates the word comeback. So there's this element that this woman is deluded. She's never let go of her stardom. She thinks she's going to have this big comeback, and everybody still loves her.
She's a loser in her own way,
right?
You know?
Right.
I mean, she's still super wealthy, but she's forgotten.
But she's very proud, and she's not sort of recognizing herself as a loser. Whereas, like, Joe Gillis is a very self-conscious loser.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
And so she's living in this fantasy, and he is willing to entertain that fantasy if it means that she's going to put him up in her nice mansion and buy him clothes and pay him to work on this script for a movie that's never going to get made.
Yeah.
And so as the movie goes on, Joe Gillis is more and more complicit in this delusion, and at the same time, though, becomes more and more like her creature.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the beginning he sort of, you know, thinks that he's going to play her basically, you know, because at the beginning it's an instance of mistaken identity, and then he's looking at her script and he begins to get the idea like, hey, I can make a quick buck.
Right.
So he's the one who's trying to con her.
Right.
But then she basically turns it around on him, and throughout the course of the film sort of draws him more and more into her clutches, mainly with the carrot on the stick of wealth.
Yeah.
But it just kind of goes to show that you can't serve Mammon long before you become Mammon's slave,
right.
and so before long he really has like chained himself to this woman and to this sort of this illusion, this grand illusion
right.
that she's created for herself, but that also everybody who's around her is sort of enabling and is actively participating in.
Yeah, yeah. And she, she sort of falls in love with him, or, and he's this accessory to her to make her feel young again, this younger, attractive man. And she's taking him out to parties and, buying him new clothes and dressing him up. And so it's this really grotesque scenario. I mean, right off the bat, he comes in and she thinks he's the monkey funeral man because her pet monkey has died. It's the greatest introduction to this.
Dude,
this
it's so awesome. It almost feels like something Coen Brothers or something,
right.
but
there's this like gothic, grotesque,
totally.
Know?
Well, he makes an allusion
gothic.
to Great Expectations. And
yes, that's right.
Miss Havisham.
Havisham.
So, I think that's like a great use of illusion there, because it immediately sort of keys you into the kind of eccentricity that you're about to encounter.
Right.
Really, it sort of sets off what becomes an extended kind of reflection on the eccentricities and absurdities of Hollywood. And it's not just this woman, but it's like the whole thing. And
there's a line by Cecil B. DeMille is in this film playing himself, the great Hollywood director.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Spanned the silent and sound era and made all these sort of like sword and sandal biblical epics and stuff. And he says, a dozen press agents working overtime can do terrible things to the human spirit. So that tells you right there that this is like a systemic feature of Hollywood.
Yeah, and of course we were introduced to a press agent in the last Noir that we talked about.
That's
so
right.
That guy
it's perfect.
times 12.
So you can imagine these people affecting her spirit.
Totally.
And it's interesting that we see that there's people who are working within Hollywood who feel a certain amount of guilt and responsibility for this, and a responsibility to take care of Norma in whatever perverse or healthy sense. I mean, we see this with two of her former directors, because DeMille is one of her former directors, and she's under the delusion that he's going to make this movie with her where she's going to play Salome. In other words, she's going to play the daughter of Herod doing the dance for John the Baptist, and she's I don't know what we're supposed to think she is, probably like 50 or something, not even that old, but old for Hollywood. And you can see that he has a desire for her not to be hurt. He's not going to tell her that they're going to make this movie, but he's going to try to like let her down softly. And then we get her other director, which we don't find out until near the end. So spoiler, but we find out that her butler, Max, was the director who discovered her when she was, I think he says 16.
Yeah.
And he says, I could not let her be destroyed. Like, I made her a star and I cannot let her be destroyed.
Yeah.
Which could like mean a number of things. It mean like, I feel responsibility for bringing her into this world, but also like, I have like a possession of this person, or like, we also find out that he was her first husband. It's this fantastic reveal because he's this creepy, like, Igor type, like butler, very quiet, very understated with this German accent, and like he's there, and you're like, what's the deal with this guy, you know? And we find out that he writes all of her fan letters that she thinks she's getting so that she won't kill herself, basically. And when he reveals that, like, I was her first husband, it's just like, it's such a great moment, because she's had two husbands since then, and he's come back to be her butler because he just couldn't not be in her life.
Yeah.
So it's this like sick.
Do we know who wrote the screenplay for this film?
It was Wilder and someone else, and then they had help from someone else. Yeah. But I can't remember the names of the other guys.
I think that there's so many layers of commentary going on in here about the industry and about these different, roles within the industry. because I think about the director, and what a director so often has to do is be a master manipulator, and that doesn't necessarily need to mean deceptive, or malicious, right. But you're handling people, you're manipulating people all the time and trying to get, this one result. And especially when it comes to actors, it's like, you really have to have a knack for you. We hear about, this director's really great with working with actors or something like that. And,
right.
And what that really means is like, he's able to manipulate them in the way a musician can manipulate his instrument. It's like,
that's probably why so many directors and actresses have had relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here we see two directors manipulating this actress, and not just out of nowhere, but because they had directed her in previous films, and so it's like you said, you wonder to what extent this is driven by guilt for having been, complicit in, not just destroying her spirit, but maybe manipulating her in some ways that were not too honest,
Right.
But I think that
DeMille comes off as a nice guy in the movie, I would say, but who knows?
He does, but it's true of everybody in the industry, at least as it's presented in this film, is that everybody's kind of in on this, and it just makes you think about how the press agents manipulate her, or how the screenwriters manipulate her, or how the guards, letting people into the lot, respond or don't respond. We get this scene of a younger guard who doesn't recognize her, treating her very differently than the older guard who does remember her.
At the Paramount lot.
Yeah. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean this is like malicious, but it's like there's a spirit that begins to operate in these kinds of circles where you really, people start to get high on their own supply.
We see the people who are lower ranking on the totem pole as well, like these guards, but also in this wonderful scene where she finally comes back, two-thirds through the movie, where she comes back to the Paramount lot to visit Cecil B. DeMille. And there's this wonderful, this magical
it's almost
sequence.
Like a dream sequence.
Yeah, it's amazing because she sits in his chair. He's like, yeah, we'll talk later, and just sit in my director's chair and watch me work because we're doing a rehearsal. And she sits down, and then out of nowhere you get this musical cue and this what would you call it, a boom mic or just this microphone? What is it?
A boom mic drops down near her.
Boom mic just sidles on through the screen and bumps the little feather in her cap, and she sort of notices it and pushes on, which is just like a funny moment in itself. And then she hears from above, Miss Desmond, and she's like, what? And then it's me, Hog-Eye. And then she looks up and there's this guy in the rafters, and it's just like this very eerie kind of it's almost like Dorothy going, we were just talking about the Wizard of Oz. It's almost like Dorothy returning to Oz and seeing her old friends.
Yeah. And you're almost not sure if it's real or not, or if it's in her mind.
It's me. And all these old timers, and he turns the light on her, and suddenly all the old timers in the studio and the extras and stuff, or whoever they are recognize her and swarming around her and greeting her. And it's like this fantasy has become real. But it's just such a wonderful scene. It gives you
but
jitters.
It's kind of speaking to what I'm trying to describe here, which is how so much effort is put into sort of constructing this this reality, this illusion of fame, success, who you are. I think that it's just sort of like the story of elite society, where you have to sort of put on airs and be talked to in a certain way, and then you have servants around who are going to sort of reinforce this perception of yourself, and it's a very, very difficult space to inhabit for long and stay kind of tethered to reality.
We're told that these writers' offices this whole block of writers' offices used to be her dressing room.
There's a great moment when she takes Joe Gillis to to go get some new clothes, and he's sort of like, this is ridiculous, but she's trying on all this stuff for him. She wants him to try on a tuxedo.
Moments.
Yeah. And the salesman comes up to him and says, would you like it in this fabric?
The camel hair, but we also have the vicuna. It's a little more expensive.
Yeah, and he was like, the camel hair would be fine, But then the salesman sort of leans over to him.
A gradual zoom in until they're very close up.
And he's in total profile, just sort of whispering into his ear, almost like a demonic tempter.
Well, as long as the lady's paying for it, why not take the vicuna?
It's the perfect moment for that, that guy who plays that one part. He's just like, I love it because he's perfectly cast. He's got these maybe it's just me, but he's got these the salesman has these very thick lips that make him look like this sensuous, tempting.
And he's got a little pencil mustache or something,
right.
But I don't know. I just
like the sly way that he leans in there.
I think I leaned over to you at that moment and said, that is LA, right? There was just something about that moment that just totally rang true to me of my brief experience of LA, which is that everybody knows this is ridiculous. Everybody knows that this is kind of fraudulent,
right.
But it's
the gift bag at the Oscars and the crafts and services and the sneaking home props at the end of the
totally
at the end of the shoot.
It was so sad because it's here is this woman at least wanting to pretend that she's being generous, she's at least sort of acting as though she's being some benefactor, but she's kind of, being manipulative.
Yeah.
And then here's this guy, trying to at least, act as if he's being gracious, and accepting these gifts, but he's being fraudulent about it.
Right.
And then here's this salesman who's trying to act as though he's, helping, but really he's in it for himself too. It's all this self-interest that's coming together to sort of maintain this unstable equilibrium, that all sort of centers around the wild success of this one person, and dude, that's a hard place to be in for anybody, but especially if you're the person at the center of that gravitational pull, which these starlets are. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an incredible film, taken from that perspective, but it's also just delightful. It's a lot of fun,
Yeah, and Louis B. Mayer, the big executive, was very angry at Billy Wilder after he saw this movie.
And wow.
Yeah, he said he said he berated him in front of a crowd of celebrities, saying, "You have disgraced the industry that made and fed you. You should be tarred and feathered and run out of Hollywood." And supposedly he followed that up by saying something about how he should, he would have been better off staying in Germany or something, which Billy Wilder had escaped, Austria,
wow.
because of the Nazis taking over.
Clearly he hit a soft spot,
Yeah. But so Swanson was a former movie star, and she, unlike her character, was more okay with that. And she also wasn't a total has-been. She'd continued to do TV and theater. Mm-hmm. So she hadn't stopped acting, but she was by no means the star that she had been. But she was convinced to take the role by, I forget who, somebody said, this is actually the movie you're going to be remembered for, which is true. So So they convinced her because they wanted her to audition. And she was like, I don't want to audition. And this guy, her mentor or her agent or whatever, was like, I'm going to personally shoot you if you don't just do whatever they ask you, because this is the movie's.
There you go. See, that's what manipulation can look like sometimes.
Right. Yeah. So she's playing this washed up silent film actress. There's a number of people in there playing themselves. Cecil B. DeMille, Hedda Hopper, the famous Hollywood gossip columnist, is in at the end. There's a scene where Norma has her old movie friends over to play poker, and they're all faces that if you were around at the time, you probably would have sort of recognized them. Right. Just like Joe Gillis takes him a minute, but he recognizes Norma Desmond when he first meets her. But it's the stars of a couple decades earlier. So you've got Buster Keaton playing poker with her. You've got some Swedish actress at the time. And the other one is, I forget his name, but he's the guy who, if you've seen A Wonderful Life, he plays Mr. Gower.
Yeah.
It's a Wonderful Life,
yeah.
but he had been a silent film star when he was younger. So there's all these people playing themselves. And then the other thing is Max von Meyerling, her butler, is played by Erich von Stroheim. And this is like the most meta thing, most like intricately meta, because there's a scene where they're watching a film. She has her own personal home theater, and she watches just her old movies and rants about why she isn't hired anymore. And they show a clip of an old movie called Queen Kelly, which was directed by Erich von Stroheim in real life. It's a real movie. It was never released in the US until like decades later.
Yeah.
But it was directed by Erich von Stroheim, starring Gloria Swanson. And in this movie, he's playing her former director. Right. And so there's just this glory. It was just like the perfect like meta thing, And because Erich von Stroheim, we've seen him in a couple of films as an actor, but he was a very groundbreaking director of the silent era, in the Weimar Republic, and then in the U.S. he made this massive epic film called Greed, based on the novel McTeague by Frank Norris, which I'm intending to watch at some point. That kind of, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that kind of ended his directorial career because it was so long and cost so much. He like went so much over budget that like nobody wanted him to make movies anymore. So he just was an actor after that. I see. Because I think the original version was like 8 hours or something, and then we have a cut version that's like 4 hours or something like that. But so this is amazing. It's like it's more rewarding if you know these things, to see the film and like how close it's coming to reality,
Yeah. And I think that, like we can talk about, Gloria Swanson, because her performance is incredible in this film. I mean, she really carries the movie. I mean, that character has to do a lot. The actor playing that character has to do a lot. And she totally pulls it off, such that like you even find yourself like sympathetic to her by the end of it, where you're almost actually in her corner. It's almost like her spell begins to work on you as well, and you like want Joe Gillis to just like kind of go along with her. But I think that also it's really remarkable that she did this role, because you have to be like really able to poke fun at yourself, but like something like that actually I think is so necessary for you, if you're in that like level of success and celebrity. Like you need to have something that helps to pull you down. I think the court jester may have functioned in this way in the past, but it's like, I think when you achieve a certain level of celebrity and success, it becomes increasingly unlikely that there's going to be anybody in your orbit who's going to just shoot it to you straight, Yeah. And so to find a way to like, to sort of just like clear the air and poke a little fun at yourself. Yeah. This film might have, not just been the film that she is remembered for, but it might have actually been the film that like, I don't know anything about her life, but could have like kept her from becoming something like this, Yeah.
And yet she lived, decades longer after this, and saw it become a legendary performance too.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting how like she plays this performance style that is so different from everybody else in the movie, and like she just gets away with it in a beautiful way. Right. She's playing almost like almost the first thing that she says in the film, in the movie, is when she's first recognized as Norma Desmond by Joe Gillis.
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures. Used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Uh-huh. I knew there was something wrong.
They're dead. They're finished. There was a time in this business when they had the eyes of the whole wide world. But that wasn't good enough for them. Oh, no. They had to have the ears of the world, too. So they opened their big mouths, and out came talk. Talk, talk.
That's where the popcorn business comes in. You buy yourself a bag and plug up your ears.
Look at them in the front offices. The masterminds. They took the idols and smashed them. The Fairbankses, the Gilberts, the Valentinos. And who have we got now? Some nobody.
Don't blame me. I'm not an executive, just a writer.
You are. Writing words. Words. More words. Well, you've made a rope of words and strangled this business. But there's a microphone right there to catch the last gurgles. And Technicolor to photograph the red swollen tongue.
There's this theme where she keeps talking about how the sound era ruined everything. And like, you know, this used to, she says this used to be there's some truth there. I mean, she says this used to be an art form that was seen all over the world. The implication being film was much more of an international art form when there was no words, you know,
right?
Which was true. I mean, they were not these the national film industries were not nearly as like local,
right? Yeah,
you know, in that era. So it really changed a lot about like the economy of film and and the scope of who you were communicating to. But she says, you know, I wish I could do the whole rant that she does about like words, and more words. You know,
maybe we can play it.
Yeah. But it's just. We get a taste of her like melodramatic acting, and it's almost like a silent film actress,
right?
If they had been speaking sounds, but keeping the silent film,
the
gesticulating silent film acting style, but with words, it's like what it would be like.
Yeah, and her performance is really, really like technically precise in this way throughout. So there are shots of her, you know, where she's just so expressive in her face and in her eyes. She captures this kind of persona that it's almost like a cliche, like the cliched idea of like the prima donna, but in a way that's totally believable, you know. It's eccentric, it's bizarre, it's too much, it's exaggerated,
right?
But it's I totally accept it, you know. There's no like suspension of disbelief for me. And
you can also like the way that she managed to be like grotesque and yet like alluring in some like grotesque,
totally
like train wreck way, you know, like the way that she like sort of seduces him through attempting to commit suicide, threatening suicide, and you know, this whole game that she's playing. You know,
it's really great. It's really great.
Yeah. Should we talk? Maybe we should talk about the character of Betty Shaffer a little bit.
This is the love interest?
Yeah. So he meets this girl who works in she works as a reader. She's sort of like the first stop for scripts that are being considered, and passes them on to the higher bosses if they look promising. And she's rejected his script at the beginning of the film, but they run into each other again.
But importantly, she's rejected it because she saw through it.
Right.
You know, like she rejected it because it was, you know, trite, because it was just something to make money, you know? And so later when they meet again at a party and she's talking to him about this script, she actually has a lot of esteem for him as a writer. In fact, there's something, an older work of his that she's picked up on and that she wants to develop further.
Right.
So, you know, it's coming from a place of like, she can see past this money grab that he's presently in.
It's interesting. I think she's supposed to be 22, her character in the movie.
Yeah, I think so.
We get the expression he's maybe in his late 20s or 30, early 30s maybe. And she is not naive, but there is a certain innocence about her desire to just make good work. At the same time, she reveals that she's from an old movie family, and so she's lived around this world her whole life, and she actually had ambitions to become a star at one point, and she got a nose job because they didn't like her nose, and then it turned out they didn't like her acting after that, so she gave up on that and is perfectly content working her way up from the mailroom and trying to become a writer. And so it's interesting because we might say she's the wholesome, innocent, naive, but she's actually learned through experience and self-knowledge what her place is,
right?
You know,
right,
and is able to accept that.
Yeah, and she ultimately becomes like the possibility for redemption for Joe.
Yeah.
Not just artistically, because they begin to work on a screenplay together. That's going to be something actually good, you know, but also, you know, romantically, she's willing to take him despite this like strange.
Well, she's engaged to a good friend of his.
Yes.
And
we have to get there eventually.
Yeah, that's not great, you know, but there is something about her that like challenges him to want more, but not in the sort of like ambitious way that he was looking for before.
Right.
Because what we've seen is that like at the beginning he's beaten down, he's already given up artistically. We don't really know if he really has talent or not. And I don't think it's to the point so much whether he does.
Right.
But he's given up artistically, but there's also he's ready to go back to Ohio. But there's also this self-loathing. And I think that he's very much like trapped in the way that he is because of his self-loathing. I think that, you know, he has no self-respect, and that's why he's able to get into this situation and stay in it, you know, with Norma Desmond. And when Betty finally professes her love to him, it kind of provokes this crisis because we get this monologue of his inner thoughts after that, and he's kind of like stunned. He says like, you know, I had her life, you know, in the palm of my hand. Yeah. He's so like aware of like the way that he could change her life.
Right.
And he also says, and this is the thing that really strikes me, is like, you know, Betty Shaffer, like engaged to, you know, Joe Gillis, as nice a guy as ever met. And then he says, and she was in love with me. And you can sense the like, that he knows like he doesn't deserve her love. You can sense his like self-hatred in that line and his like shock. Yeah. But also like something else about that, her love for him, that is waking him up to like his conscience up. Right. In a way. Right. And because basically he's just been throwing his life away and manipulating someone who's already crazy. Right. You know? Right. And then we find that Norma has discovered his relationship with her, and she's called her, and that provokes a further crisis where he invites her to come to the house and explain to her what's going on. Yeah,
no, you know, it's too bad that he doesn't, you know, he doesn't see any better way forward than to basically break this girl's heart so that she gets away from him. You know?
Yeah, but I think it's clear that that's what's happening. I think it's clear that there's this whole scene where he's in his very snide and kind of like unreal way telling her about, you know, that all the perks he's getting from this relationship, and sort of he's like, you know what, it's exactly like when we talked about Sweet Smell of Success, when the Tony Curtis character Sidney Falco, when he's with JJ's sister, when he puts on and with his assistant, his secretary, he puts on the noir, hard-bitten guy, I don't care about anybody role. Right. But that's like a fake. Even though he's not a good guy, there's a pose about that. And it's the same exact thing in this scene. And he's putting on this, I don't care, you know, I don't have a conscience, like, you know. And you're wondering, like, so is he going to stay with Norma? Right. You know? And I think that, and he basically provokes Betty to leave. And then it's only after that we see like what his true intentions were, because he doesn't want to take her away from her fiance, and he doesn't believe that he deserves her, and he thinks he's going to be bad for her. But she's left, and then he immediately packs his things. Yeah. And we know that he wasn't doing it so that he could stay in this cushy situation. Right. So I think that like there's this thing that I've referenced before in the noir genre of kind of like the main character doing something kind of admirable at the end, but in like a self-loathing way, and still keeping this like loser status that he has, totally, and often at cost to himself, because we saw this with in the case of Sweet Smell of Success, he's still looking out for his own self-interest,
Right.
so it's not quite there as much.
Right.
But definitely in Out of the Past, in the Maltese Falcon, I would say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just the cost is that you lose the girl, but sometimes it's worse.
Right.
You know, and in this case, it leads to her shooting him.
Yeah.
And we're back where we started at the beginning of the film with him lying face down in the pool with 3 bullets in him. Yeah, it's a fantastic ending.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, because this climax, now the press are all at her door again.
Yeah.
You know, the police show up, obviously, and there's a crowd of reporters, the cameras, the lights, and she's totally like broken. You know, like she's had like the break with reality. Right. And so she's in her mirror, you know, getting ready for this big reveal. And even
she hears the word cameras, and that's all she hears. She is hallucinating that she's on the set with Mr. DeMille, and she's going to do the dance of the Seven
her butler,
Bells.
this old director and her first husband, you know, totally keeps it up. Like, okay, like rolling, action, you know, and she comes down the stairs, and I
just want to say it's a great performance by him in that moment too. Totally, you can see his lip trembling. He's like he knows this is the end. You know, but she comes down and she's she comes down and it's this dance, this great musical cue with like the tango rhythm, because there's this whole grotesque scene where she's dancing with Joe to a tango earlier in the film, and she's coming down and writhing her arms around, and it's like this
and at the
horrifying,
very end,
chilling, and then she gives this speech.
I can't go on with the scene. I'm too happy. Mr. DeMille, do you mind if I say a few words? Thank you. I just want to tell you all how happy I am to be back in the studio, making a picture again. You don't know how much I've missed all of you. And I promise you I'll never desert you again. Because after Salome, we'll make another picture and another picture. You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
At the very end, she looks straight into the camera.
Yeah.
Like, and that's like the last image of the film is her looking at us.
What does she say? She says, "You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us and the cameras and those wonderful people out there in the dark." It's like,
and all of a sudden,
so chilling.
You're very aware of being that one of those people out there in the dark, you know?
What a brilliant line.
It's awesome.
Yeah. And the most famous line in the movie is after that, where she says, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille," which is like a very often quoted line, but all those wonderful people out there in the dark.
Yeah.
It's like she's got this like Cruella de Vil, you know,
but
vibe.
You know, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but like one thing that you hear from a lot of directors, at least in like the circles that I moved in art school, was like, yeah, you know, like it's really great because it really implicates the audience, you know, or like I'm really trying to implicate the audience with my work, and it's like I just like hate this expression, but if anything ever implicated the audience, it's this line and that gesture of like looking into the camera, you know, it's really great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect line because it says so much about like the way that stars and celebrities relate to their audience. It's like you're out there in the dark, in the outer darkness, and you're bathing in my resplendent light, you know, and you're wonderful. You're so wonderful. I couldn't do it without my fans. But it's like there's this definite hierarchy.
Totally.
You know.
Totally. Dude.
And it's like it's amazing. It's such a great line.
So this is the third noir that we've watched, but this is also the second film we've watched that is just about Hollywood. Because the last one was Hail Caesar.
Oh, right.
And I don't know. There's a film that I really love called The Bad and the Beautiful with Kirk Douglas, and I think we should watch that one too at some point.
I think so.
Just have like a just round out our trilogy of films about Hollywood.
I think we should. I think at some point we should also watch All About Eve. That's a really good one.
Oh, cool.
It's about the New York theater world, but it's really about Hollywood.
Sure.
Because it's
Sure.
the experience that it's reflecting.
Yeah, I
is
don't
the
know. There's
Hollywood
just something so
experience.
delightful about these movies that
Yeah.
deal with the industry. And
Yeah.
but you know, something I wanted to say too is that like noir is a characteristically American genre.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that it's sort of riffing with or dealing with is this American sort of like Protestant work ethic, or the like the American dream, you know, or like what you were saying before about this modern idea of everybody has to work to get ahead. And I think that California in general, and then Hollywood in particular, really sort of like amplify that. If America is emblematic of this ethos, this American dream, California really is like the land of opportunity out west, you know, gold rush.
And that's the classic setting for noir.
Exactly. So I think that sort of that uniquely American angst is, you know, underneath all of these noir films, at least the ones that we've watched so far.
I mentioned this film has this narrative voiceover and this sort of confessional flashback quality to it. The film actually originally began, the first edit of this film opened with a scene inside a morgue with the assembled corpses, like, how'd you get here? Like, talking to each other about how they got there. And then Joe Gillis starts talking about how he was murdered. And so apparently the first couple of test audiences like thought it was too like comic or something.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome.
They removed that.
Oh dude, I wish they'd kept that.
Yeah. I think that on Criterion, not on Criterion, but I think in the like the special features for the whatever this film's DVD is, you can actually, I don't think that they have the video of that, but you can hear the audio.
That's
of
amazing.
That, like conversation. Yeah.
Wow, so cool.
Yeah. So but it is interesting, this sort of this confessional flashback, and like, you know, what are we supposed to make of like a dead person, you know, telling us his story?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Cause like if the dead person is telling us his story, then that's not like all there is. Like, is it just like a cutesy like way of telling a story, or like, you know?
I don't know. It's almost like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, you know, like it's like he's like doomed to tell his story, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me throw something in from this noir book that I've mentioned a couple times.
Cool.
By the Catholic philosopher Thomas Hibbs, wrote a book called Arts of Darkness on film noir.
Great. And Thomas Hibbs, if you're listening to this podcast, come join us, please.
Yes. Now, so in the quote, he's also quoting some other film critics, but I'm not gonna break that down. I'm just gonna read it as though he said it all. There's a couple of different passages which I think bear on this. He said, confessional flashback could convey fatalism, but also freedom, because narration is a form of second-order quest for communication, for truth, and sometimes even for reconciliation or redemption that cuts against and in some measure transcends the fatalism of the first order of events.
Nice.
And then there's another passage. He says, the ending of many a noir and neo-noir film manages to combine physical brutality with enduring longing for communication, understanding, even at times love. Some films suggest that even in the midst of a corrupt world, a certain kind of integrity is still possible, and that in certain circumstances, defeat can be victory. Sure. I think I read that quote on a previous episode too, but
I buy that.
I think what tips me towards that kind of interpretation in this film is the way that he displays pity for Norma in his closing voiceover. His closing voiceover his opening voiceover is all about him and what he wanted. And, you know, he wanted a pool and he got it because he's lying face down in a pool. And the closing voiceover is, you know, what are they going to do to Norma? I think is something that he says. He says, like, you know, the heartless so-and-sos like crowding around to get this story. And at the beginning, he even says, like, I wanted to get you the real story before you read about it in the papers, basically.
Yeah.
So he's trying to tell this as the story of a human being. And at the end, he's reflecting on, like, what would it do to her, even if she managed to, you know, avoid jail the headlines are gonna the killer.
Yeah.
Has been starlet. Murders writer. That kind of stuff. And so I think there's sort of like a compassion that he ends up feeling for her.
Yeah, and even in the way that he leaves her before she shoots him, it's not like you really get a sense of he has a strong animus against her or anything. He's being firm. He's cutting the cord. But it's not like he doesn't want her to get help, Yeah. He's just recognizing that he can't be the one to do it, So yeah, I think that tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Billy Wilder is one of my favorite writer-directors of classic Hollywood. And he actually is one of the pioneers of like the auteur in Hollywood filmmaking.
Sure.
For those who don't know, the auteur is this, I'm not an expert on auteur theory, but it's this thing that these French critics came up with in like the 50s to describe the director as the singular author of a film, as opposed to just a hired hand, assigned to a film by a studio system. Somebody who like the whole film is his vision.
Yeah. It
doesn't have to be that he wrote the script, but that's often the case. So, some of the people that they would argue were auteurs in some respect would be like, a John Ford or whatever. But then there's this sort of like slightly later generation that are like sort of the real beginnings of auteurship. And one would be John Huston, who did The Maltese Falcon and The African Queen and Wise Blood. His last film, I think, maybe was Wise Blood, which we'll probably discuss on this podcast at some point.
Yeah. I'll have to read it first.
Oh, you've never read it?
Yeah, cool. I've started it a couple of times and just never like stuck with it.
Anyway, Billy Wilder is another of those, and writer director, and he's also one of the noir pioneers because he did Double Indemnity as well, and the same DP, the same cinematographer as Double Indemnity worked on this film, John F. Seitz, who's kind of one of the pioneers of the noir look. And it's just also interesting too, and part of the reason I bring this up is that Billy Wilder got his start, I think he's Austrian, and he got his start making films in the Weimar Republic. And there is this connection, I think we've mentioned before, between noir and German expressionism.
Right.
And so we get that in this film, and it's sort of also doubled by the presence of Erich von Stroheim, who's sort of an older generation of Weimar filmmakers, and who was something of a mentor in the States to Billy Wilder.
Nice.
So I just think it's interesting that like the connection between like German filmmaking is like is right here.
I think that Sunset Boulevard was a great way to cap off this little detour that we've taken into noir, because I think it just has given a good opportunity to sort of like sum up a lot of what we've said. But is there anything else that we haven't yet said about noir that we want to say before?
I don't know. I think it's just a really interesting mix of what might seem to be sort of a fatalism with like a sort of redemptive quality. And there's something about it has a very unique aesthetic appeal, because of the way that it combines those things.
Yeah.
I think like a sort of darkness and like seeming cynicism.
Yeah.
But with like sort of like a gleam of goodness
and
on some level.
And also there's just sort of like a coolness. There's a cool factor that's very enjoyable.
Right.
These films are just cool.
Right.
And I like that.
Yeah, it is interesting how like at the time of this, maybe this emergence of the loser as like a central figure in American self-consciousness, like there's this genre of films that sort of like redeems the loser in a way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So you can see it as like a critique of different things about America, but also just like giving the loser his story.
Yeah. That's great.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening. And I hope that you will consider, we've got our fall campaign going on, right?
Yeah, that's right. So by the time this episode comes out, I think we will be in the middle of our fall campaign.
Yeah.
right now I'm still preparing for it. So we don't know what goal we're going to set just yet, but whatever it is, we need it. And so if you've been thinking about giving to Catholic culture, supporting this podcast or any of the podcasts that we do, or just any of the work that we do over at Catholic Culture, it's really quite the media project we've got going on over there with liturgical year resources and news and commentary, and a really vast library of all sorts of documents of Catholic interest. Listen, you don't need me to talk about this. Just head over to catholicculture.org/donate/audio. We could really use the support right now because we're trying to match a grant. And if we don't match it, we lose it. And if we don't get it, then we're in trouble. So yeah, if you any little gift counts. Like, that's what's important, is that we don't have any sort of financial angels or like huge donors. We really just count on the sort of grassroots efforts of all the people who enjoy our material. So anything that you can throw our way, it all adds up. And It's really quite humbling for me to see that from the back end, like, oh my goodness, the power of a lot of people just doing what they can, know. So we're very grateful. But
and we pray for our benefactors on a daily basis. So there's that too, and we pray for all our listeners and our readers and stuff.
But there's a little more prayer, a little more of a.
I pray for them all equally. But all right, well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time.